Whether you're an experienced mechanic or someone who just got into riding, the ability to change a flat tire is an important skill. Before you begin this process, the first thing you want to do is ensure that you actually have a flat, so I recommend pumping up the tire and seeing if it can hold pressure. Most modern bicycles have what is called a quick release skewer. However, some higher end bikes will have a through axle, and some older bikes will have a threaded axle with nuts on the end. If the quick release skewer is properly installed, then it will be on the left side of the bicycle if you were riding it. If you're facing the bicycle head on, it will be the right side. To remove the front wheel, we're going to break the lever loose. Once the quick release is loose, we can now use our fingers to loosen the nut on this side, and eventually we can wiggle the front wheel out. You want to make sure that if the bike you're working on has disc brakes, that you don't squeeze the brakes while the disc is removed, otherwise it will close up the caliper. I find the easiest way to work on a flat is sitting down with the wheel on my lap. While you can fix a flat with your hands, I do highly recommend having a tire lever handy. It's going to save you a lot of time and energy. Now as I'm working, I'm going to use my valve as a reference point. I'm going to take my tire lever and I'm going to have it facing so that the hook side is down, so it's going to look like this. I'm going to insert it between the rim and the bead of the tire. Once I've inserted my tire lever, I'm going to turn it over like such, and that should pull the bead of the tire out. Now that I've pulled the tire bead out, I'm just going to use the tire lever to go all the way around the rim. Now that I've unseated my entire bead, I'm going to grab my inner tube from inside, and I'm going to start pulling it out of the tire. You'll notice my valve stem is still in. That's going to be the last thing I remove. Most Presta valves are going to have a lock ring here, so I'm going to remove that. I'm going to set that aside, and now I can pull my entire inner tube out. I want to make sure that I keep my tube oriented the same way that it was sitting within the tire. That way if I find a hole somewhere along the tube, I can check the tire in that corresponding spot to see if the object is still there. The simplest way to find any leaks in your inner tube is to take a bike pump and start inflating your tube, and you're just going to pump it up until you start to hear any leaks coming out or until you've determined that there is no leaks in it. Again, I'm making sure that I'm keeping my tube in the same orientation that I took it out in. The two main sources of flats are punctures and pinch flats. A puncture is just that. It's when something punctures through the tire and the tube and allows air to escape. A pinch flat is when the tube is improperly seated and gets pinched between the bead of the tire and the rim. Most punctures are only going to create one hole, whereas a pinch flat will make a snake bite pattern or it will make a V shape. Once I've determined the source of the flat, I want to inspect the tire to make sure that if there is a puncture, that object is no longer in the tire. If it's a pinch flat, I want to inspect the bead of the tire and make sure that there's nothing on the bead of the tire that would prevent it from properly seating. When you take a tube out of the box, it's going to be wrapped up like this with all of the air taken out. So the first thing you want to do is unravel it. And we're going to put a few pumps of air into this so that it actually takes a nice cylindrical shape that we can easily fit into our tire. You're going to grab your pump and you're going to latch it onto the valve stem here. And we're just going to put a handful of pumps into this tube here. Now once it takes this nice circular shape, we don't want to put any more air into it because if we do, it's going to be harder to insert into the tire. One of the reasons we pump some air into this tube is so that we have an easier time inserting it into the tire. The other reason is it's going to help us avoid some pinch flats. So we're going to grab our wheel and tire assembly here. We're going to keep that side that was open on the top, and now we're just going to find the hole that the valve stem goes into. Once we find the hole for the valve stem, we're just going to pull that bead back, revealing the hole on the inside of the rim. With that tire bead pulled back, we're going to drop our valve into the rim, and now we should be able to put the bead of the tire over our tube. I'm just going to use my hands to tuck the tube inside of the tire, and you'll see how adding that little bit of air is going to allow us to pop it into that tire a little bit easier. Now I'm just going to go around and use my hands to push down on the tire a little bit, set that tube a little bit better inside of the rim. So now I can either use a tire lever or my hands or a combination of both to start to reseat that bead. I like to start at the valve stem and go around both sides at the same time to make my life a little bit easier. Now once you get to the point on the bead that's across from the valve stem, that's going to be the toughest spot to get the bead back on. This is where a tire lever really comes in handy. Some people actually use two tire levers. one to hold the bead down, and the other one to reseat it. On most bigger tires, like mountain bike tires, you should be able to do this with your hands. In fact, most people are actually able to do this on road bike tires as well. However, if you do get a stiff bead, you do want to make sure that you aren't pinching your fingers or the tube. So I recommend using the tire lever for this part. Earlier we used our tire lever like this with the hook side down. Now we're gonna flip it and use the hook side up. We're gonna use the tire lever hooked inside the rim to follow around the bead of the tire, and that's gonna seat the tire bead for us real easily. Once you've seated the bead of your tire, you wanna go around and make sure that every part of the tire's bead is actually sitting inside of the rim. Then you wanna go ahead and pull the tire off to the side, exposing the inside of the rim. We're just gonna go around and make sure we don't see any part of the tube sticking out between the bead and the rim. This is gonna help us avoid pinch flats. As you can see here, the tube is properly seated inside of the tire, so we're good to go. You also want to repeat that process for the other side. Once you've confirmed that there's no spots that the tube can get pinched, you can go ahead and start to inflate it. So just like in our bike 1 video, we're going to take our bike pump and we're going to latch it onto our valve stem. And then you want to make sure that you don't exceed the maximum rated pressure for your tire. In our case, 50 psi. So because I unseated the bead of this tire, I want to make sure that as I pump it up, the bead is properly set and it doesn't come off the rim somehow. If for some reason the bead isn't properly set and you start to see the tube come out of the tire, you want to make sure that you let all of the air out, otherwise the tube will blow. I typically leave one hand on the tire to make sure that the air is actually going into the tube, and I use the other hand to pump air into the system. Now if you start to hear some faint popping noises on your tire, that's a good thing. That means that your bead is starting to properly set inside of your rim. As I pump up this tube, I want to make sure that I'm inspecting both sides of the tire to make sure that the tube isn't sticking out anywhere. Once you've reached the desired pressure, you can reinstall the wheel. To reinstall the front wheel, I'm going to bring the wheel up and make sure that it properly sits inside of the brake caliper. I want to make sure that when I'm reinserting my wheels that they're sitting straight in the frame and they're not crooked in any way. I'm then going to hold the quick release lever roughly parallel to the ground with the cupped side up. I will then start to tighten down the finger nut on the other side, being careful not to over tighten this. Once that's firm, I can use my hand to re-engage the quick release lever, making sure that it's in front of the fork arm. You'll know that your quick release lever is the proper tightness when it takes some firm pressure from your hand to re-engage it, but not too much to the point where you need 2 hands or a hammer. Now that you fixed the flat, you're ready to hop back on your bike, take it for a spin.